Welcome back to Collateral Banter. Baudrillard on Capital and Labor had a very interesting commentary. So I'm going to read some parts of it to you. He says, don't capital and labor have the same destiny? Can we describe work today as a productive force and as the basis of wealth? So long as labor was experienced by the majority of human beings as an alienation, it was possible to allot it as a subversive role. Man faced up to the machines as best he could. It was said that they were alienating, and man tried to free himself from them. But in our logistics of man-machine interaction, we're no longer dealing with labor. Man and the machine are interfaced. There's no longer any subject of labor. There's an operation. We're no longer in a situation of transcendence, vertical confrontation. We are rather in a horizontal situation of functioning and networks. Nowadays, someone who works is pretty much a corpse they can't manage to get rid of. The system would like to get rid of it, but it can't quite manage the trick, and the suffering workers don't want to lose their raison d'etre either. This is paradoxical. But in the overall picture, now labor no longer figures as a rupture energy, nor even as a source of wealth. It's merely a form of identity claim. Modern technologies, all this high-tech equipment, are no longer so much extensions of man, as McLean used to say, but human beings are now becoming rather a kind of extension of the logistical system. And then what comeback can there be? How can they refer to their own labor, since this no longer has any true definition? There's no longer really a price or a value of labor. Labor is caught up so much in the multiply interconnected networks like information so that it can't really be evaluated. It's caught in the speculative form of work that is employment, which is no longer part of the social contract. I found that statement very interesting, and we see how that's being played out today and how people feel that work is always following them. They're always at work. Even when they're not at work, they're actually checking their emails, doing work, and how that's really changed the relationship between capital and labor, worker no longer ending the day. Right? We see that in modern technology. You can now check your email and work from home. So you're always an employee everywhere. But the part I think is also interesting is that in today's world, increasingly you see a push to create more and more entrepreneurs. Everybody is their own businessman. There should be this push towards creating your own enterprise, and that you'll create your own business and future. And that's really interesting, because as you see this bigger and bigger push towards it, you're going to see fewer and fewer workers in that relationship, where everybody's going to be their own little entrepreneur, their micro entrepreneurs. That's what all the Uber cars are, right? They're their own businesses, despite, and this is being debated in the courts, who is legally responsible if you're taking an Uber, the driver or the company, right? But everyone is their own individual contractor, right? Everybody's their own little business. So you're seeing the world, I believe, and I agree here with Baudrillard, that you're seeing a fusion of labor and capital, where you won't be able to make the clear distinctions that did exist. So I found that very compelling and very interesting. This part is much longer. It's on page 55 of Paroxysm, which is an interview Baudrillard did with Philippe Petit. And this one's a little long, but follow along. It's interesting, so I'll read the whole thing. It's a little long. But who or what would take us beyond, if not the system itself? He's talking about capitalism. In the old historical relation, there's an antagonistic polarity, not a collusive one. There are oppressed and oppressors, and the oppressed don't live in recrimination. They live in revolt. Today, everyone is locked up in their victims' claims. So there's no revolt anymore, no antagonism, but a perverse situation, a new perverse and consensual social contract in which everyone tries to gain the recognition as a victim. Everyone becomes both victim and accomplice in this. Everyone is on both sides of the fracture, if indeed there is a fracture. At any rate, it's no longer a line marking a conflict or a relation of force, but rather an involutive line, a line of unhealthy complicity with the state of things. Take the example of Credit Lenance. Taxpayers are going to have to pay 180 billion francs to bail out Credit Lenance. In the past, it was the state which did the bailing out. which admittedly amounted to the same thing, but now the responsibility is clearly assigned. Capital, confident in impunity, can step forward without its mask, saying explicitly, capital is you, the state is you. Moreover, the Credit Léonce affair is another extension of social provision and welfare. If all the cases of social need are taken care of, there's no reason not to assist Credit Léonce when it comes in distress. By contrast, the unemployed in various cases for social assistance are now given to understand that they have to look after themselves, that they have to manage their enterprise better. The individual is treated as a capitalist business, and the capitalist business as a citizen on welfare. The role reversal is perfect. The social has backfired in a manner entirely to the advantage of capital. There you see some more of his sort of Marxist historical roots, but still very intriguing, and very much agree with the analysis so far. And again, he's saying this in 1998. I will stress that throughout this. He continues on. If Credit Léonce falls, you fall. If the factory closes, you clear out. So Credit Léonce is you. The company is you. This wasn't true in the classic age of capital and exploitation, when the demarcation lines between the oppressed and the oppressor, exploited and exploiters, was clear. The same forced complicity and collusion, and hence the same blackmail, takes place in the political sphere. What a democratic marvel it is, the transference of responsibility. The citizen is now the shareholder, and consequently no longer has an interest in seeing the business go under. Revolution, in which those at the bottom took power, has given way to devolution, in which the government itself cedes its power from the top down. Democratic trickery or the ruse of history? The fact is that this transfer of responsibility corresponds to a diabolical twisting of the democratic principle. It's capital connecting back to itself like a Leyden jar, or curling into a spiral. But it is still capital? Don't ask what the state can do for you. Ask what you can do for the state. The perfect formula for interactivity as a strategy for calling the population to order, for transferring all problems onto those on the receiving end. Parody of the ideal of reappropriation of one's destiny. So then he's again asked about capitalism, and he's asked, is capitalism for you the cold monster Simone Weil referred to when speaking of the state? It's a monster, he responds, which is standing social liberation on its head. It's capital now that's emancipating itself from work. It's parents who are liberating themselves from their children. End of the Oedipus complex. End of the class struggle in whose shade everything worked so well. All the flows are being reversed. The talk was all of freedom, of emancipation, of transforming as much fatality as possible into liberty. Today, it's evident that the great wave of liberation is simply the best wave of giving the slave back a bogus power and freedom. Forced integration, the masses now intervene directly in the event through the ratings and all other immediate feedback devices. They've become interact. In opinion polls, we're all involved statistically. Forced complicity. In any case, we've been interactive for a long time. Like it or not, though, all the automatic response system we're enslaved to. And the interactivity we're being offered will never, by a long chalk, be the equal of the interactivity we already suffer. The collective interpassivity which the other form merely prolongs with information and communication. I think his analysis of capitalism today is arguably more accurate in its depiction than many of those on the left who still see this clear demarcation line between workers and capitalists. I think what Baudrillard is able to do in his analysis is make a lot of connections to technology and how that technology has begun to make the clear lines of labor, worker into blurred lines, into a unclear mishmash. It's the complexity argument that I bring again about that being something that the excess complexity that we have today, creating sort of an authoritarianism. Well, I think Baudrillard here's analysis makes a lot of sense to me in the sense that the lines are blurred, and this makes people passive and at the same time perhaps capital. People are the capital in this system. I would argue Maybe this isn't the best definition, but late capitalism, when I hear authors and scholars talk about this, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about this rapid change in the technology into human beings, and that human beings and their ability to think, act, their DNA, their thoughts, who they love, I mean, it's all been absorbed into a system that they think is separate from their own bodies and thoughts and emotions and feelings, but no, it's actually them. They've become capital. In many ways, that fusion between labor and capital makes so much sense. And when I read that words during his interview, it made me stop and think and say, wow, that is quite brilliant in the analysis, especially coming in from 1998. But we see today how this technology has altered our ability to commit acts of spontaneity, of sort of rebellion. If the system capital is able to accumulate vast quantities of data about people, vast quantities of information about people. Look, there was actually one book that mentioned this, that the algorithms today are so good that they have a pretty good idea of where you'll be tomorrow. They're predictive of the future. Show me. And it certainly confirms what I think Baudrillard is saying here, that the fact that capital has begun to consume the human body, and that unable to distinguish between labor and capital allows an algorithm to then figure out where you're going to be, because it's a matter of you following your routine every day. And think about human beings in a different perspective. Instead of seeing human beings as complicated and irrational and different, as I think there is certainly some of that, but I would argue the current global economic system, globalization from the technology exists today, is beginning to reprogram human beings on a mass scale. If everything we hear on the news today about fake news, right-wing governments, posing a dangerous and direct threat to democracy, to liberal democracy, if that was the right argument, what does it say about human beings? That we've just returned home, that we went, protested, and returned home as if, hey, we did the best we could. Now I got to go and pay the rent. We got to pay the mortgage. We got to do all of that. Despite what's happening throughout the country and the institutions, essentially terminating in many ways that liberal democracy. Then we have to ask ourselves and beg the question, did we really believe in that liberal democracy if we weren't able to defend it consistently and throughout the years? It's a very dangerous move. I have always talked about Turkey, Hungary, the United States, Brazil now, India, and Israel, other countries. But this is also happening in Western Europe. You've seen this now in Italy, and you've seen it, I think, with the Brexit vote. We realize that there is this fundamental change in the ability today of social media to inform an individual, to inform what they think, how they act, to predict where they will be, what they may say. That gives the technology and capital, whoever can understand and program that, full control of human beings. There's going to be a point where we're going to have to discuss the ability of human beings. Are they even alive anymore? If you can reprogram them through technology, through algorithms, through data collection, the question is going to have to be asked, are they human? It makes me think how the scientific world is now converging with the social political world of the world that we exist in today. That this convergence integration is maybe the word that I would put, and how it has actually changed both labor and capital. And I think that this is a really fascinating story. I will want to say this, and this is really important. Data is the integration between machine and people as of today. That is what we do when we are on the internet. We are giving them our thoughts, our habits, our ideas, our fears, whatever it is that you can possibly think of in your mind. And it will use that as a profile to sell to you. But in many ways, that is also a profile about who you are, what you're thinking, and all of these ideas. And then they can project out in the future based on previous actions, previous data, people with similar attributes, and foresee problems that you may experience in the future. And so in many ways, it's not even the human being and the machine are integrated, but the machine now is so different than it was before when you just had a hammer or something like this. The hammer alone won't hit the nail. It takes a human being to pick up the hammer and hit the nail. And I foresee the future of data and its production as a way of aggregating human information and data. What's the thing now that I read a lot about this recently in the last couple months and years, that the algorithms are so good, they're able to predict if, for example, you're pregnant even before somebody else in your family is. Why? Because it's based off what purchases you've recently done at the supermarket, and then they can look and see, wow, you might be interested in certain vitamins that women take. And this happened to a kid who was 17 years old. So again, they don't even need to have you tell them the truth. Just based on changes in habits of how we consume, they can now figure out what is going on in your life. And then find you products that they know you'll be using, because they know from algorithms other people who've gone through a similar experience, for example, a pregnancy, and then say, oh, well, these might be items of interest to you. That is radically different than I think what the economic and production phase that we used to have. And so Baudrillard's take on this in 1998 was spot on in my view. Maybe the rebellion of Trump in this world today isn't so much at what everybody tries to say, it's racism or singularity, but it is actually a product of globalization bringing all these forces together. But we don't get to control what forces come in or out. It's a mishmash. It's a complex unity of different collaborations and factors, right? Multiple things happen in globalization. You're not just breaking down markets, you're now integrating whatever's happening locally in that country, which could involve exporting computer viruses or nuclear waste. And you could be importing that. So economic systems are itself fusing and coming together. And we're getting a range of corporate investments and capital, but at the same time, you're getting a range of other unexpected intertwining of things, products, cultures, other unexpected disease, I think, is going to be a huge part of it. And that's what it transmits. You know, I thought about the Ebola crisis that happened, I believe, in 2015. And that's, again, a product that can spread rather fast and throughout the world, especially in today's world where people are able to take a plane and be across the globe in a couple of hours. So again, that's what globalization offers in many ways, this ability to travel from one country to another and bring whatever was happening locally, your culture, religion, and potentially a sickness or a disease, and transmit that to somewhere else around the world. And then from that point, that can be transmitted and spread locally, and that can be transmitted elsewhere. How there's that flu pandemic that we're always talking about. That is going to be more and more of a reality today. And that's why I argue, or would argue, that the nation states today cannot deal with the kind of complexity and intertwined issues that are arising today politically. They cannot be controlled. We do not have a way of managing those systems if we're only thinking about our country, putting up walls, putting up borders, limiting immigration. You can't control what's happening on the outside. But even if I was wrong in saying that, even if absolutely wrong in what I just said, as just garbage, you just put it away. If I am wrong, okay? Or we still have to accept that modern global capitalism will not function unless countries are working together cooperatively all around the world. People cannot have the idea that you are governing merely for your own self-interest or for your own people's self-interest above all else. If that is the case, then what is going to happen in the future is a collapse of the global economy. All of the world economy will have to shrink, and it will collapse on itself, because if you start putting up barriers to trade, barriers to all of these global capitalist functions, because you're hoping to just benefit your own country, you will be punished for that sort of mentality. Global capitalism will punish you eventually, not in the beginning, but later on. You will realize that global capitalism will not reward you just because you're from a certain country, just because you have a certain nationality. That's, I think, the wrong way to look at it. I really think that misses the point. Globalization ultimately is going to start questioning the power of the nation state, who the people are, who's allowed in, and actually does promote and create sort of this open border or whatever people want to call it, or encourage that, because you can't have free flow of goods and capital and begin to exclude people, or begin to have governments that say, I only want to benefit these people over everybody else. Those people aren't going to get the benefits of economic globalization because my people need it more. I don't know if that world's going to work given the constraints of profits, of where global capital exists today. That is the world, and our inability, I think, as Baudrillard has portrayed it, as to see a future that is beyond this world, to one that can resist and create a different vision of the future, that we sort of lack that vision, right? And that's connected into, I think, this mechanicalized, networked world that he describes. So look, I don't think I am going to have simple answers. I am going to do more episodes about Baudrillard because they prove to be more popular. But I won't only do that. I'm going to do a mix of episodes on different talks and different authors and characters. But I think I'm going to, for now, talk more and more about Baudrillard and what he says, and try to maybe read small sections of it and have my conversation with people that way. It's with Baudrillard and the people. So yes, that wraps up another episode of Collateral Banter. I really appreciate you listening. The music's from the Free Music Archive. It's Caballo by Dubcon. I really like it. But I'm thinking maybe I'll change it once I pass episode 20, 25 or something like that. So I like to change things up once in a while. We've been listening to Collateral Banter with Danny T. I appreciate you. Till next time. Peace.